Good morning. Welcome to Struggles of the Spirit. I'm your host, the Reverend Leland Udell, and I'm glad you have tuned us in this morning. We have something quite different, a real treat, I think. This morning we're looking at the whole world of books, why people write, why people read. And we're having an expert in the whole subject, a librarian who is with us today. Her name is Marti Fiske, and she is the librarian at the present at the Shelburne Public Library, the Pierson Library, and she's consented to be with us today and to talk about this subject. So we're delighted you decided to turn on Channel 15 this morning. We also would like you to call us and to, as you listen to the program, at 12:15, we open the microphone and the telephone to callers. So we would like to converse with you at that time. So please phone us. The phone number to call will be displayed on your TV screen, and we would like that to happen. If you have an extensive note or letter you'd like to write in response to some things that Marti Fiske might say today, you can send the letter to her care of the studio, Adelphia Studio, Channel 15. And she will be given the letter and she will respond. So we're delighted that you're here this morning.
Thank you.
Talking about books. And you did bring some books, and so let's talk a bit about the philosophy of reading, I guess, and writing, and then we can talk about some specific books that you'd like to share with our viewers.
Okay.
So, to my question, why do people write?
Well, probably people have many different reasons. Some people may say that they write for cathartic reasons. They have some issue, some problem that they need to resolve, and they work through it on writing, and they find that it's something that other people would be helped by. And that may be one reason. Maybe a personal interest, maybe something with history that they're particularly interested in. Could be some family history that they feel would be helpful to other people, and just plain ideas that they want to share with people. Ideas that they think may help others or be of interest or entertaining to others.
Is it true, and I think I've heard this said before on several occasions, that sometimes an author doesn't know where the book's going to go? They say the book will write itself, and I'm just the scribe, and I can't fully tell you how it's going to end. Do you find that's true?
Usually I find the best writers are the ones who at least take that and they sketch it out beforehand. I find that some of the authors who simply go totally from stream of consciousness, just write out, end up becoming very confusing, and you find that they say the characters just took over the story. I find usually the most popular books are the ones that at least have some sort of form to them, but that initial idea, I'm sure, takes quite control of their everyday and breath, so to speak.
As you speak critically of writers, I have a criticism I want to share with you about writers, and I'd like your thoughts. Sometimes it appears that the writer really doesn't write well at all. Their use of English, their choice of words, their phrasing is not really pleasant. It seems to be a disharmony in what they say, but nevertheless they sometimes become bestsellers. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, probably a couple of ways that might have happened. Number one, it could have been a very popular person who they felt had good selling power and didn't have much editorial control, and So even though the person may be a famous person, they may not be a good writer. And they may not have had the power to change the words to make them more harmonic. It could be purposely written in a way to create disharmony, sort of force people to slow down and take in what they're reading, to force a point in an issue. And it simply could be that the idea is very good, but their way of expressing it is not so good.
Mm-hmm.
Those are some of the ideas I could think of as to how that could happen anyway.
A former babysitter of ours, she was a teenager when we had her as a babysitter. We were living in New Jersey. She has become a well-accepted pulp writer of hot-blooded romances.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, she makes no bones about it. She's not writing literature. She's just making money, and the people will buy them, and she'll write them. And her writing skill, I don't think, is exceptional, but it's not poor by any means. And she sells books.
She's creating a fantasy world that,
Yes.
that people are quite happy to get into. She'll probably do quite well. There's a niche for every writer out there. There's always someone enough people who will agree or like the style that they can usually make a living at it if they try hard enough.
Well, my wife and I have a long-term friendship with Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote Wrinkle in Time and many other books for children, quote, or adults,
Mm-hmm.
quote. And when she wrote her first well-accepted book, Wrinkle in Time, she tells us and others that it was rejected by different publishers on 24 occasions before it was finally accepted.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing, you know, that she didn't give up, that she didn't say, well, I guess these are professionals, these are editors, and they are all rejecting me, so it must mean that I'm not cut out to be a writer. But she kept on, and she kept on looking for some publisher that would take her story, and she finally did. It was Ferris, Strauss, and Giroux.
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, we'll take the risk.
I hear that a lot from new authors who they spend 8, 10, 12 more years just writing out ideas, and finally they find a story that fits with an editor somewhere out there, and well, rarely anyway. I think that someone will have their first piece of writing that matches up with the first person they ever sent it to. Mm-hmm. I've never heard of anything go that well.
So it's unusual if someone accepts your manuscript right away.
Oh, yes, yes. I think that the minimum I've heard of was 2 or 3 years at a dozen or so publishing houses. Usually it's a several-year process from what I understand.
So we were talking about, I went off on a tangent here a little bit, but I sort of enjoy some tangents. As we talk about writers and why they write, you have some other reflections about why people write.
Well, I think that for many people, there's a romance in being a writer as well. They imagine a certain lifestyle that goes with it. They may have a love of literature themselves and sort of get a romantic picture. And I hear of many people who say, oh, I'd love to be a writer. I could get up whenever I wanted, and I could just write a few hours, and I'll take the day off and walk the dog on the beach, and I'll make lots of money and not have to work more than 5 hours a day.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good. Unfortunately, as we were just saying, it takes several years of hard work for most writers to be able to get to that point. I think that there's a lot of people who find that it's not quite as easy as they would like, but it's something that they have a real passion for. Many people may have been very voracious readers as young people themselves, and just feel that it's something they have to do.
It's a basic instinct within them somehow.
Yes.
Almost like some people who are athletes, they have to run, or they have to throw a ball, or they have to have a competitive sport that they're in.
I think you'll find if you ask most writers, they kept journals throughout most of their life. There was a friend of mine who's been keeping journals since she was in grade school and has books and books of them. And an author who just recently won, Robert Blake, he won the, for Akiak, the children's book, he won the Red Clover Award. And he has volumes and volumes of journals and scrapbooks that he kept writings and illustrations in throughout his life. And sometimes it's just mundane stuff, he said, as far as what the temperature was that day and what he did. Other times it's ideas for stories, illustration ideas for books he's working on.
So it's a workbook.
It's sort of, yes. It's a way that he can put his thoughts together and see if there's anything useful. He said he keeps the front page blank so that he can do sort of an index so that if he has an idea later, he can go back to that notebook and he can
I was going to ask you about that. How does an author who keeps an active journal ever dip back into what he or she wrote a few years ago and find that gem they want to pick up?
They have to be a little organized. If they're the sort of person who just sticks in scrap pieces of paper here and there, they may not do so well.
No.
But he suggested keeping the front pages blank so that anything he thought was particularly good he could make a note of on the first page. My friend who keeps journals, I think that she keeps them organized by the years in which she writes them. Usually if you have an idea, you can sort of say, well, let me see, that was a year or two ago, and you can go back to that notebook. Some people mark the edges of the pages down or something on the corners.
And you speak of pages and notebooks. Does that rule out computers for authors?
I certainly wouldn't say so, but it hasn't, until recently, it wasn't very easy to bring a computer with you if you were going on a trip or something.
A laptop is a little large.
It's not quite as conducive to meditation either, I don't think.
Well, Madeleine L'Engle, she had this, and still does, has this incredible discipline while she's waiting for a plane or a train or whatever. She just takes out her small typewriter, which weighs, I don't know, 6 pounds, 5 pounds, and she just writes. I don't have that kind of discipline. I would keep looking at my clock and talking to the people next to me and wondering about when the plane was going to arrive. And but no, she is able to, highly disciplined, to use that free time that's not committed to write.
I've heard authors say that even when they have writer's block, that they force themselves to sit in front of their computer or at their desk in front of their notebook, whatever it is they do their writing. And until that time is up that they are supposed to be spending, they just sit there. And even if nothing goes out on the page, at least they have taken that time and thought about it.
That's intriguing, Marty. I appreciate that. I'm going to remember that. That's a lot of internal discipline.
It is. Yeah.
Okay, so now why do people read?
Well, people read for information. They read for a sense of release from the world that they're in. They want to kind of relax into some sort of fantasy world. They may have some characters that they particularly are interested in that become sort of friends to them, that they sort of want to keep tabs on. They may simply look at it as a way to shut down for a while and let the world go by them and relax. A lot of people don't like what's on television, so they'd rather pick up a book. They feel they have a little more control as what they can read. I think for most people, information and just a way to release into some other world.
You pressed a button of mine about Mrs. Polyfax. You know
Oh,
her?
yes.
Our viewers, obviously, you know her, so you can join in, but I just feel impelled to tell our viewers, if you don't know about Mrs. Polyfax, there are a number of books about this woman. She's not the author. I can't, you might know the author's name.
It escapes me. I think is it Beaten or Crimes? I can't, it escapes me right now, I'm afraid.
Well, Mrs. Polyfax, any bookseller or librarian, I think, would know about her. She's a woman, supposedly, I guess her late 50s or very early 60s, whose husband had originally they lived a long life, and he died, and she didn't know what to do with herself, and a lot of people were saying, well, you can go and help at the garden club or some kind of activities as a volunteer. And this all kind of bored her, and so one day she went to the was it the CIA or the FBI? I guess it was the CIA.
I think it was.
Went to the CIA and said she would like to volunteer to work for the CIA. They thought, you know, she was practically crazy, and well, you know, this is not exactly for you, my dear, and she looked very much like a typical tourist, an American tourist, and she was also known for her fantastic hats. Mm-hmm. And so they said goodbye and, you know, thank you for thinking of us. And then somehow or other, and a little bit later, they thought we could use a courier to take some item to some secret agent off in some part of the world. And you know, she might be all right to do that. So they call her up, and yes, of course, she's delighted to do that. And so off she goes, and she looks completely like she's not working for the CIA. She doesn't work full time for them. She's sort of, what would you call it?
Fill-in aid, I guess.
Yeah, relief worker or something. And but she gets into the darndest messes, and she's supposed to only be a courier, but inevitably she gets into the thick of things and helps solve all kinds of international problems. And the only thing that's out of character for her is that she's an expert in karate.
Which comes in quite handy often.
It does indeed. It does indeed. So she always goes to exotic places. That's what I think pressed my button. Far away, where most people don't even go as tourists, and you know, she's always a delight. Her practical, charming way of coping with life, and her ability to deal with all kinds of things. But she never lets her garden club neighbors know that she works for the CIA. So.
Books are an interesting way to travel if you can't afford it or haven't the time.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way. Maybe through fiction with Mrs. Polyfax and Jordan, or it could be you know, a tour of Stonehenge and other great monuments in Europe. It's I think it was one of the things that interested me in traveling, and I haven't gone very far yet, but I have had all these wonderful places that I've found in books. And
you don't have to work for the CIA to travel either.
You don't, no. No, it helps if you have the time and the money, though.
Yes.
But if you haven't the time and the money, then public library and books. You can travel in your mind, at least.
You can. Yes. You can. And those of us who grew up before the age of television, we were used to radio, and we like reading. We created all kinds of scenery, all kinds of ways of describing and visualizing the hero or heroines that were all in our head. And so, although most people don't listen to radio like that anymore, you certainly, when you read, you do, so to speak, because you create these people.
I find that a lot of people who read books, or that particularly if one is going to turn into a movie and it's had a couple of books beforehand with the same characters, they're almost always disappointed with the movie because the characters and the stories didn't match up to that ideal that they had in their mind while they were reading. The imagination of the individual is so much more personal than a movie or a television show, and It never turns out quite the way you expect in a movie.
That's true. I've had that feeling. And your first love are the people you have given flesh to as you read, not the imposters on television.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me some more thoughts about why people read. And children, why this has been a part of your life as a school librarian before your present position. Why do kids like to read?
I think for the children, the first thing that draws them in are the illustrations. You'll have very young children who are perhaps just starting to be able to put together stories themselves. They'll look at the pictures and they'll tell a story that may or may not match up with what the author had written, but it's a way for their imaginations to sort of take off. Children love stories. I have two nieces who just sit and stare when I read them stories. We'll play house and we'll pretend to go off to the library for story time, and they'll just sit there and listen to all the stories that I could possibly remember for hours if I let them, and crawl up on your laps. It's a family thing too.
Mm-hmm.
If you read with your children and you bring them up on your laps or tuck them under your arm, they love to snuggle up close to you, and they
sure.
know that it's something that's important, that it's something that is relaxing, and it's something that they can learn from. Children just love to just absorb everything if they're given the opportunity, and someone who is patient enough to guide them through it. Kids are always asking why. When they turn about 2 or 3 years old, that's sometimes all you hear. And you have to ask them, okay, put that into a full sentence. What are you asking me about? And books are a wonderful way to start answering some of those questions. I find that parents will come in, or I myself may be asked why by my niece, and I can't answer it. I have to go and look it up and share it with them and sort of bring it down to a simpler, sort of less complex way a 3-year-old would understand. And you end up understanding and learning a lot yourself that way too.
You have some sage advice for parents who get driven bananas by their kids who ask multiple questions?
Well, I take the time to answer them. I think that's important. You may not have the time to at the time maybe say to them, well, let me finish what I'm doing now and, think about that question. Maybe I'll jot down the questions, so tonight when we're reading books to bed, before you go to bed, we can see if we can answer that question.
I like that.
I would take the time to do it, because children learn that if they ask a question and no one answers and it continues, they'll stop asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
You'll unfortunately see that sometimes in school. If the child raises their hand all the time and they're not picked, well, as years go by, they don't raise their hand as often. It's important to take the time, I think. Books are a wonderful way to say, let's do this together. And once they're old enough, then you can point out books that they can look up themselves, and you won't have to take all of the time necessarily to answer the question, but point them in the right direction, or send them to their school librarian or their teacher or someone who can help them find the answer.
I've visited the Pierson Library in Shelburne many times over the years, and it always delights me to see the children's area where the children can come, and at least the way it's been in the past, and just sort of all these books are there for them to make a selection from, and they're just right in the open. They don't have to fill out a request card and have someone go to the stacks and remove the book. They can just look at this vast panoply of books and make some selections and take them down to the desk and sign out with them.
We find that people, adults and children, adults as well as children, find that scares them a bit. They
Really?
walk in and it's information overload. They have no idea where to start. They don't know what they're looking for. They just have some question. They're not sure how to put it into their mind. And in library school, they said, you need to do a reference interview. You need to find out what they're looking for and then help them find the information. And people, unfortunately, sometimes they're afraid to come into the library. They don't know what they want, and they don't know how to get it. Important thing is to ask. That's what the library staff is there for, to help you find out what it is, exactly what you need, and where to find it. And if it can't be found on the premises with today's technology, we can go outside the walls of the library, find it on the internet. We can get a loan from another library to find the information that you need. So sometimes, well, just the other night, we had a young girl, 3 years old, and she picked out 5 or 10 books 5 minutes before closing, and then she decided she didn't want them. She put them all back. She didn't know what to do. There were so many books to choose from. And finally, you know, between the two of us, we had to get her a few books, get her comfortable, get her on her way so she could come back for more when she found where she found something interesting.
That takes some real sensitivity on the part of the librarians.
Well, it's something that you have to have, or you shouldn't be in the business.
When I was in college, one of the things I did to pay my way through college, along with my parents' money, was I worked as a page in the college's library and getting books and shelving books. And I love that because I had privileges in the stacks, so I could go back there and look at the shelves and look at stuff that I would never realize was sitting there by looking just at the catalog, But I suppose I was on an advanced level, you might say. I wasn't overwhelmed with the information. I was just delighted in it, Just I felt like a kid with my hands in a cookie jar. It just.
That's one of the benefits of public libraries. Academic libraries, as you said, you may have a page who has to go and get the book from the staff. From the stack somewhere, but with most public libraries, at least the ones in Vermont, especially since they're small enough, the patron can go in and look themselves, and many times I have found something not where I expected to find it. The thing that I needed most was the book that was four down on the left from the one that I had found in the card catalog. Sometimes just browsing the shelves find the best treasures that way.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's interesting, your comment that way. It wasn't just my experience as a page.
No. I think that most people, well, I've had it often happen, and someone will say, oh, I was looking for such and such, it wasn't there, but I found this one, and it was really great. I think you should read it.
Some other reasons why people might want to read.
Information, I think, is something that's important for a lot of people. They may have a problem that they need to look into. They may be looking for help or support in an area. And if they can, you can search on the internet till you're blue in the face, and sometimes it just won't work. If you come into a public library, then you can often get another person's idea. You can pick up information on support groups if there's an illness in your family and you're looking for a support group. If you're looking to do research on some sort of medical issue, information is so powerful. People can make so much better, make more informed decisions if they have the information that they need. That's another very important part of the public library. You can't make a good decision if you don't know what the facts are.
So really a good library is a research center.
It is. It's not just pleasure reading. You have to be able to help the patrons answer the questions that they have. And if you can't help them right there, then they have to be able to ask beyond the walls of the library where you can get the information.
we were looking up in our dictionaries at home. I say dictionaries because we have several different kinds of dictionaries, and they don't always agree, and sometimes they have they even leave some words out that one dictionary will have, another dictionary will not have. Like I had a large, almost unabridged dictionary that didn't have manure in it for some reason. Whereas the Webster's Collegiate edition that I've had one form or another for years has it. But what I was thinking of is that we were thinking about Thanksgiving Day. When did it start? And has it always been the same date? And why is it that Canadian Thanksgiving is in October and American Thanksgiving in the States is in November? And nobody in Vermont goes out and harvests anything at the end of November.
Mm-hmm.
And so we found some help in the dictionary. But I'm just thinking, just more as a library, having even more resources than a few dictionaries and an encyclopedia would have, and you can look up things like that in the library.
I think you'll find that the average household will have a paperback dictionary that they may have had when they were in college or high school,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be the only reference resource they have. More people having computers now, they may have internet access or a CD-ROM encyclopedia that came with their computer, but not many people have sets of encyclopedias in their home.
No.
Basic information sometimes is just not at your fingertips at home, and you'll need to find it somewhere else.
I think it used to be the 11th edition of the Britannica was supposed to be the best. But that was a while ago.
Yes. Well, I think for adults level reading, Britannica is wonderful.
Yeah.
It's too difficult for children, though.
Sure. So you brought some books here.
I have a bibliography that I wrote up of some books that people may find especially helpful in dealing with different issues. I have them broken down into a list of adults and list of children's books, and I would be happy to make this bibliography available to anyone who would be interested. I was sort of thinking of some books that have helped people overcome some issues, or may have made a special, touched a special point in them when they were reading it. And I think one that most people know about by now, and in fact was recently on television, was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. And basically it's the sharing of a friendship between a man who's dying and his college students from several years earlier. And most people find it's a very poignant story, that it forces them to sort of slow down and take some time and examine their own life. Those sort of books are very, very important. Most people sort of rush through everyday life, and you need some time to sit down and point out what it is that's most important.
This is a good book illustrating my program's title, "Struggles of the Spirit." Being familiar with the book you're describing, Tuesdays with Morrie, it's about the spirit of Mitch and the spirit of Morrie, and how Morrie shares his inner life with his former student. It's a lot of good writing. It really shows the human spirit and what's going on inside.
It's another case of it doesn't have to be a big book to be an important book.
No.
It's a very, very small book. Most people can read it in one evening, and it's what's inside. What's the way that he put the words, the thought that was put into it, and the important friendship between the men. It's a wonderful book. Sometimes fiction can do the same thing. Usually the fiction's inspired by a true instance. In the author's life, Richard Paul Evans is famous for a trilogy that started with a Christmas box. There's a young family who moves in with a widow, and after she's died, they start going through her belongings, and they find a box, and they find just how important she was, how unique she was, and that inspired another piece, the timepiece and the letter, which is a continuation of the family afterwards. But it's a case where a true instant in the author's life made them think that it was important enough to share with someone, and changing some things. Another one by Richard Paul Evans is The Locket. It's a story of the friendship between a young man working in a nursing home and an elderly woman who's a patient at the nursing home. And again, it was inspired in true life by a woman who he ended up visiting starting out in high school as a assignment for a high school class. He was to visit with a patient for, I think it was 12 weeks or something, and at the end of the semester he could go on his way. But he had developed a very close relationship with the woman and kept on seeing her until her death, and it became an important part, and he took that story and changed some things around and turned it into The Locket. The Art of Happiness, a handbook for living, it's written by the Dalai Lama. It's been on the bestsellers list for several weeks now, and I've perhaps halfway through it, and I'm finding that the Dalai Lama's got some wonderful common sense advice.
He does.
Yes.
He does. He's an amazing man. He's obviously not a Westerner at all, but yet he's speaking to all of us very profoundly, and people are responding to his words with a lot of enthusiasm.
It's one thing if sometimes common sense is what it takes. You may have a wonderful idea, but how do you put it out so that everyone can understand what you're saying? And those, I think, are some of the pieces that of writing that strike the chord with people. If you can find a no-nonsense way of writing something that's very important, then everyone will understand it and they'll accept it. There are some books that have been written from difficulties that people have had in their own lives and how they've worked their way through it. There's a collection of books, short stories about women who are caring for their aging parents and the opportunities that that caretaker's position has given them to say goodbye to their parents, to heal old wounds, and sadness and sorrow involved. And one of those is called The Dutiful Daughters, Caring for Our Parents as They Grow Old, and it's put together by Jean Gould, who's the editor. It's a wonderful collection of stories. More and more people now are taking care of their parents in their own homes. I know that my own mother did, and it was a very important time for the two of them. There's also another one called Twilight, Losing Sight, Gaining Insight by Henry Grunwald. It's an autobiography of how the physical difficulties of macular degeneration, losing his eyesight, has given him new insight into his life and provided him with a chance to slow down and take in the wonder of everyday life. It's another case of a very small book that has wonderful, wonderful things in it. Also, there's those books that just tell you to take time for your life and make those little things important. Little Things Mean a Lot, Creating Happy Memories with Your Grandchildren by Susan Newman. It's just a couple of sentences on different ideas on ways that you can make memories that are special. Works for aunts and uncles too.
Can you remember what some of the things she was saying?
Well, it goes all the way from truly spoiling to some really good ideas. There's some truly spoiling ideas like don't ever say no, but there are some also very good ideas like having the child make pictures and turn them into buttons, and wearing the button around, letting the child know that you think that they're special and you want to share their ideas with people. Planting a flower garden and watching it grow with your grandchild, so that you can take that time and have a project together that they can watch. Making scrapbooks of everything that the child has done and presenting it to the child at the graduation of high school. I know that my grandmother just recently gave me back the brag book that my parents had put together for her, pictures of me when I was 1 through 5 years old, and she gave it to me shortly after I was married, and it was wonderful. She had copies of her own, others, and it was very nice to have the pictures back myself. Most kids don't get those pictures until after their parents have died.
Why is it that parents so often hold on to those photos forever, it seems?
I don't know.
I mean, I tend to do that too. I hadn't seriously wondered. Maybe we don't want to give up our record of those early years because we enjoy remembering them.
I think probably too there's the idea of being the keeper of the memories. I know that we used to get together at my mother's place and the holidays, and sometimes we'd pull out the books while Christmas dinner or Thanksgiving dinner was being cooked, and we'd start recounting all of those aunts and uncles that we'd lost touch with over the years, and it was a nice opportunity for us to sit down and talk about pictures. And oh, there's one with me with a Band-Aid across my nose. Well, what happened there? And you find out all these stories.
Sure.
I think that's a nice feeling of security, being the keeper of the memories too. But I know the kids like them. I did.
It's an interesting thought. So I'm repeating it for our viewers. As I understand it correctly, for parents when their children become young adults, to give them the pictures of their growing up. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, it's a wonderful way to pass on memories. Lots of times you may have forgotten what happened in those pictures, and I think that's something as you start living your life as an adult that you can start putting some of those memories into lessons on how to live your own life.
Interesting thought. I again, thinking as a parent, I suppose there's a resistance. I mean, to giving them up, because you're always going to be my little boy. You're always going to be my little girl. And here are the pictures that prove it.
Right. When your children start having their own children, that's a wonderful time to start pulling them out too.
Oh yeah, because the kids love to. The grandchildren love to see them, and sometimes, so I'm a grandfather once now with our daughter's child. Sometimes the grandchild will, particularly if she looks like her mother, she'll deny that that's my mother. That's me. No, that's your mother. Well, I mean, it's kind of fun to see the interaction between the child and the mother, and then us, the grandparents.
It sort of gives the child the opportunity to see their parent in another light as well.
Yeah.
No, my daddy was never small enough that you could carry him in your arms. My aunt's my sister's husband is a very tall man, and the nieces always think that Daddy was always that big.
Sure.
And then they find pictures when he was in junior high school and he was shorter than their mother.
Well, they've always known him as a tall man, so
right.
How could it be otherwise?
Exactly.
They're trusting their empirical data.
There's also some wonderful books for children. I brought along a couple so that I could point out some illustrations.
Okay.
This
Please
one
do.
is by Patricia Polacco. It's called Thank You, Mr. Falker. And this is the story of the author's difficulties in learning how to read and what it was like for her in school. This is a wonderful picture that shows a lot of emotion in her face. The students are picking on her because she can't learn how to read. And eventually a teacher ends up helping her. I have a wonderful picture of him at the beginning of the story. It's this very, very young teacher, red hair and freckled-faced, and you can tell sort of a howdy-doody looking man. And he takes her under a wing and teaches her how to read in 5th grade. And now here she is, author and illustrator of children's books, and very popular. And she didn't learn how to read until the 5th grade.
So parents, relax. It doesn't mean that something wrong with your child if they don't learn to read until a later age.
This is a wonderful book called Jinka Jinka Jelly Bean. It's a story of a young girl who dies and goes to heaven, and in heaven she meets her grandfather. And in heaven they do all sorts of wonderful things together, and it talks about their love for one another, and how she has found happiness there. It talks about some of the things that they do in heaven.
This is all in heaven, the book's about that.
It's all in heaven.
Delightful.
Yep. And they have other children in heaven that she plays with, and other adults that she dances with.
It's a creative idea.
It is. It's this is put together and donated by the Jinka Foundation. They'll donate copies of this book to families who have lost children.
Oh.
So it's a nice way to introduce the idea of death to very young children if the opportunity should arise. There are also the classic books of how love can overcome. This is an older style illustrated copy of Velveteen Rabbit. I think most people know this story. How love makes a stuffed rabbit come real. First real to the child, and then real through a fairy who comes and does her little magic spell.
I should interrupt us at this point. We may have more time for books, but it is time for our viewers to phone in. So Karen, if you would put up on the screen our phone number, and we really would like you to phone in and ask some questions about books, about your interest in writing, perhaps, your interest in reading, your interest in how your own friends and family read or what they don't read, and whatever you like to talk to us about. We're sitting here together today talking with Marti Fiske, who's the librarian at the library in Shelburne. So please call us. So we invite your call, and we'll stop talking as soon as we know you're on the line. So show us some more.
Sure. I just want to remind everyone that any of these books that I've talked about, I've written up into a bibliography, and you can write here to the studio, and I will forward a copy of the bibliography to you. This is The Biggest, Best Snowman by Marjorie Collier. This is a story of a child who's very, very small, and her family tells her, well, you're too small to help us out. I think this is a wonderful picture because she's got a huge mother, and she's got a very large sister, and she's a tiny little girl over here, a little Nell. It sort of gives an idea of just how small she is. And with the help of her animal friends, she's able to make the biggest, best snowman. Tells kids that, you know, even if you're little, you can still help out, and you can take part in a wonderful project.
You're important.
Yes. I think it's really important to take time and to make the kids feel as though they can help. I know my mother was recently moving into a house, and my nieces were there, and they wanted to help, and they were just going to get in the way. They were afraid they were going to get crushed. So we brought them upstairs and said, help us make the bed so Grammy and Grampy can go to sleep tonight. And we just let them take the time up and pull the covers up. They weren't perfectly straight, but they felt like they were being helpful.
They were?
Yep.
They were. That's great.
I also, let's see, there's also a holiday story, which is good timing, called The Crippled Lamb by Max Lucado, and his family helped him take part in this. It's about a spotted, crippled lamb who feels as though he's outcast. All the other animals pick on him, and when it comes time to move into a new field, the lamb is told it has to go back to the manger because it can't make the distance. It can't walk that far to the new field. And the lamb ends up being one of the first to see the baby Jesus and keeps him warm until Joseph is able to find some cloths to swaddle him in. It's a nice story about how you can be very important in someone's life.
Even when society doesn't count you for much.
Yes. Another one on the same line that's also a holiday story is How Little Porcupine Played Christmas by Joseph Slate. Porcupines are prickly. No one wants to get too close to them, so none of the animals will let Porcupine play a part in the Christmas mangers play. Told he has to be on the cleanup crew or he has to be a stagehand or something, but they don't want him in the play. They're afraid they're going to get stuck, or the tinsel's going to get stuck on his porcupine quills and he'll ruin the play. And the parents, when the scene opens up, they have this big Christmas tree, and the parents notice there's no Christmas star. The porcupine, meanwhile, had been picking up tinsel and putting it on his quills to keep things neat. And so he climbs up the Christmas tree and curls up into a ball, and all of the tinsel on his quills shines so that he looks like the Christmas star. He finds the perfect part to play in the play.
That's fun.
I also pulled out some holiday stories. One's called The Christmas Train. It's a wonderful story. The pictures are very dark. They're watercolor pictures, and they may not be as inviting, but it's a neat story of how a little girl saves a train from collision with a rock slide by taking her Christmas tree out onto the track and burning it as a warning for the train to slow down in time to avoid collision. One of those little cases of sacrifice and how they can save others. And for Hanukkah, which is still going on, there's Herschel and the Hanukkah goblins. Herschel outwits goblins who are haunting the village synagogue and won't let the villagers celebrate Hanukkah. It's a wonderful story, beautiful illustrations by, I think it's Patricia Hyman. And if you really get into it and do the voices of the different goblins, kids will just sit there with their eyes wide open.
Also, it's New Year's now, Ramadan for Islamic people, and that's another event going on right now.
There are also Kwanzaa books available. There's one called It's Kwanzaa Time, and it's a wonderful collection. It has everything from songs to short stories to recipes and crafts. It's by Linda and Clay Goss. Very vibrantly illustrated stories. They're only like a one-page illustration within the stories, but I think that kids will really find it interesting.
You have lots of books for us to read.
Now you have to take the time.
Yes, yes. I'm intrigued with what you said earlier, Marty, about for children that pictures interspersed amongst the text is really important, and that it brings back to mind the days when I was a child, and I always eagerly looked for the pictures. And I was pretty much a voracious reader. I would get stacks of books from the public library, plus whatever books my parents bought for me. But I still looked for those pictures, and then finally, as I got older, there would be a picture just inside the cover, around just past the title page maybe. And then no more pictures, but just that one picture. But even that one picture was delightful, and I hadn't thought about it, but I guess it's really it encourages a child to read.
It sort of helps sets the mood too. You may have something that's really totally unfamiliar to a child, something that takes place 200 or 300 years ago. I'm picturing Treasure Island, R.L. Stevenson. And a child may have no idea what a full-masted ship looks like. And those illustrations can help put the place and the time and the setting into the story for the child so that he can have an understanding. If someone's talking about climbing into the crow's nest, if you're a 10 or 12-year-old, you may not have no idea what they mean, but if you see this picture this huge mast and this little tiny person sitting in a basket at the top, it really helps the story. I know when I'm looking for books for young people, that's the one of the first things I look at is the pictures, because lots of times if the pictures don't invite, they won't read the book. It's an enticer, a little bit of a candy to get them into the book. And if the story is good, all the better. But lots of times they'll read even if the story's not so good, if the pictures are great.
Along that line, you bring to mind a child who once, having worked in hospitals all my life, and in pediatrics as well, of course, in hospitals, I remember a little child who was quite ill, and we talked about God and what God was like, and finally the little child said, "I need to see God. I need God with skin on." I thought that was very profound. You know, that it wasn't enough to have examples and to have all kinds of you know, fine theology and prayers, but she wanted a God she could touch, a God she could see, a God she could hug, a God who would snuggle with her.
People say seeing is believing. It gives you something that's easier for you to work your mind around.
But that was her term, with skin on. We have 2 minutes left. We still invite you, viewers, to phone in. We're here with Marti Fiske, a librarian from Shelburne, and from the library there, the Pierson Library. We're talking about the struggles of the spirit as it pertains to writers and readers. So if you have anything you want to ask, now's the time. Please give us a ring.
I just wanted to remind people that this bibliography is available, that they could write to the studio, and I'd be very happy to forward it on to them. I thank you for giving me an opportunity to share books with people here. I think it's a very, very important.
Do you think the computer is going to do away with books eventually, or with bookstores?
No, I don't think so. They're not as warm and as inviting. They're working on it. They've got those little notebook readers, but I don't know.
Well, it's the same way perhaps that movie houses and motion picture products have not been replaced by the TV story, by the TV drama.
There's a certain aura that it gives you. For those people who are Star Trek fans, they'll remember that Captain Kirk would sit and read hardcover books rather than reading from his computer notebook. Even in number 7 or 8, whatever they got up to, he always had a book with him, maybe 200 or 300 years old and falling apart at the time, but he wasn't reading off of his computer.
Well, there's something personal about a book.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here with our viewers. We've had the pleasure of having Marti Fiske with us, talking about books and writing and why people write, why people read. And she's also given us a list of some fascinating books that we might want to read. And you can obtain that by writing us at the studio here, the Adelphia Channel 15 studio. Thank you for watching us and for being with us in the spirit today. Thank you. Thank you, Marti.
Thank you.